Let me paint you a picture of my life at Vane's Technologies. Imagine a disaster movie, but instead of earthquakes or alien invasions, the catastrophe was me trying to navigate normal human activities like walking through doorways or operating standard office equipment. I possessed what my grandmother diplomatically called an active relationship with physics, though physics seemed to be the one doing all the talking, usually by throwing me into walls or sending objects flying in directions that defied several laws of science. My cubicle looked like a bunker designed by someone with severe anxiety about workplace injuries. Rubber corner guards protected every sharp edge of my desk, installed after the Great Forehead Incident of March. A fully stocked first aid kit sat within arm's reach, restocked weekly, and I was currently on my 4th backup computer mouse this month. The previous 3 had met their doom through various HANA-related mishaps involving coffee spills, accidental drops, and one memorable incident where I somehow got the cord wrapped around my ankle and launched it across the office like a high-tech slingshot. My colleagues had developed what I called the HANA radius, an invisible protective zone they maintained during meetings, presentations, or any situation where I might be handling objects. This radius had expanded significantly after the infamous Christmas party incident where I'd somehow turned the company's expensive new coffee machine into what the fire department later described as an improvised fountain system. Today's mission should have been simple: survive the morning pitch meeting with the Reynolds account team without causing any major structural damage to the building or traumatizing potential clients. The presentation, 47 slides of what I genuinely believed to be marketing brilliance, sat innocently on my desk, each slide printed on premium paper and organized with color-coded tabs because I'd learned that preparation was my only weapon against the chaos that seemed to follow me like an overenthusiastic puppy. But Theodore Carmichael, our head of sales and part-time destroyer of dreams, had already made his position regarding my professional future crystal clear. Yesterday's performance review played on repeat in my mind like a particularly cruel song you can't get out of your head. He'd leaned back in his ridiculous leather chair, the one that probably cost more than my car, and delivered his verdict with the casual cruelty of someone ordering a sandwich. "Hannah," he'd said, adjusting his perfectly knotted tie while studying his manicured nails, "you're not aggressive enough for this business. Honestly, it's a miracle you reached this position with those skills." His laughter had echoed through the office like a hyena discovering a wounded gazelle, and I'd watched through his glass office walls as several of my colleagues suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. I'd nodded, as always, because that's what I did. I nodded and smiled and pretended that comments like that didn't feel like little paper cuts on my professional soul. But today felt different. Today, I could practically feel the universe loading up its cosmic slingshot with particularly hefty stones, and I was standing directly in the trajectory path wearing a target that said "Please aim here." The Reynolds account was worth more than my annual salary multiplied by a small integer, and landing it would either establish me as a legitimate player in the cutthroat world of corporate sales or provide Theodore with the perfect excuse to escort me to the unemployment line. Given my track record with high-pressure situations, I was calculating the odds at roughly 60-40 in favor of unemployment, with a 15% margin of error for unexpected catastrophic events. If mornings were supposed to be the calm before the storm, then Tuesday decided to skip straight to the hurricane. The elevator, which I'd ridden successfully approximately 400 times without incident, chose this particular morning to develop what I can only describe as performance anxiety. Somewhere between floors 4 and 5, it shuddered to a halt with the mechanical equivalent of a dramatic sigh, trapping me with Gerald Pemberton from accounting and his legendary inability to read social cues. This reminds me of yesterday when Whiskers, that's my cat, had the most interesting digestive episode, Gerald began, apparently taking the elevator's malfunction as a sign from the universe that someone needed to hear a detailed analysis of feline bowel movements. You see, it started around 3 a.m. when I heard this peculiar yowling sound. 27 minutes of elevator music punctuated by increasingly graphic descriptions of Whisker's gastrointestinal adventures later, the elevator finally lurched back to life. I burst into the conference room like a caffeinated tornado, my presentation material scattered across my arms like oversized playing cards in the hands of a very nervous dealer. "Sorry. Elevator. Cat problems," I gasped, which in hindsight was probably not the most professional explanation for my tardiness. In my rush to reach the presentation table, I managed to catch my foot on the extension cord to the projector, a cord that had been lying innocently on the floor like a technological tripwire waiting for its moment to shine. The projector toppled forward with the grace and inevitability of a felled tree, its lens meeting the glass water pitcher in what could only be described as an aggressive introduction. The pitcher, apparently taking offense at this sudden assault, launched a perfect arc of ice water with the precision of a medieval catapult, sending its entire contents directly onto Theodore Carmichael's imported Italian suit. "Whitman," he roared, jumping up from his chair as water dripped from his perfectly styled hair, transforming him from corporate predator to wet cat in approximately 2.3 seconds. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. No coordination. No control. No sense of..." His tirade was dramatically interrupted by the projector screen, which had apparently decided that it had witnessed enough chaos for one morning and was staging its own rebellion. The screen snapped back up with the velocity and enthusiasm of a rubber band seeking revenge, connecting with Theodore's forehead with a sound that echoed through the conference room like a gunshot at a library. The Reynolds account team, 3 stern-faced executives in matching navy suits who looked like they'd been manufactured in the same corporate assembly line, sat in stunned silence as Theodore stumbled backward. His arms began windmilling frantically as he fought against gravity, momentum, and what appeared to be divine intervention, before collapsing into his chair with enough force to activate its wheels. The chair, apparently as eager to escape the chaos as everyone else in the room, began rolling across the polished conference room floor with Theodore clinging to it like a very expensive, very wet rodeo rider. It gained momentum like a runaway shopping cart with commitment issues, crashed through the conference room's glass partition with a sound like the world's most expensive wind chime, and deposited a thoroughly dazed Theodore directly into the lap of Mildred Fernsworth from HR. Mildred, who had been peacefully enjoying her morning yogurt while reviewing what appeared to be vacation requests, suddenly found herself wearing both Theodore and her strawberry banana breakfast. The yogurt exploded across the hallway in an abstract art pattern that would have made Jackson Pollock weep with envy. "Meeting adjourned," squeaked the lead Reynolds executive, whose face had turned the approximate color of vanilla pudding. The 3 of them began gathering their materials with the urgency of people fleeing a natural disaster. "Wait," I called out, because apparently my brain thought this was an excellent moment to demonstrate leadership skills. My attempt to chase after them resulted in me stepping directly onto my scattered presentation cards, which had somehow arranged themselves on the floor like the world's slipperiest welcome mat. My feet shot out from under me with cartoon-like precision, physics demonstrating once again that it had a personal vendetta against my professional success. I found myself sliding across the polished conference room floor on my back like a human hockey puck, arms flailing as I gathered speed toward the refreshment cart that had been wheeled in for what was supposed to be a civilized business meeting. The collision, when it came, was spectacular. The cart and I met with the enthusiasm of long-lost relatives, sending an impressive fireworks display of pastries, sugar packets, and steaming beverages into the air. Danishes achieved flight, coffee cups performed aerial acrobatics, and approximately 47 sugar packets created what looked like a localized blizzard. When the chaos finally settled and the last eclair had completed its trajectory, I found myself lying on the conference room floor looking like I'd been attacked by a bakery. Cream cheese decorated my hair in festive patterns, Danish crumbs had somehow migrated inside my blazer, and I was fairly certain that one of my shoes was now somewhere in the vicinity of the water cooler. 30 feet away, Theodore sat in HR looking like he'd been struck by lightning while simultaneously being baptized in dairy products, still dropped across Mildred's lap like a very inappropriate throw pillow. The Reynolds executives had vanished, presumably to find a less catastrophic business partner, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the sound of their rapidly retreating footsteps echoing down the hallway. "I'll fix this," I announced to the devastated conference room, with the kind of determination that only comes from someone who has clearly learned nothing from the previous disaster. The words echoed off the glass walls like a challenge to the universe, which I'm pretty sure started laughing at that exact moment. I spent the next hour crafting what I believed to be the perfect recovery strategy, fueled by 3 cups of coffee and the kind of desperate optimism usually reserved for people buying lottery tickets during economic recessions. If Theodore thought I wasn't aggressive enough, I'd show him aggressive. I'd call the Reynolds team directly, bypass all traditional channels, and demonstrate the kind of take-charge attitude that closed deals and changed corporate history. Armed with my backup presentation, laminated after too many liquid-related incidents, and wearing my lucky power suit, the navy one with the mysteriously expanding waistband that I'd bought during an optimistic shopping spree, I marched toward Theodore's office with the confidence of someone who had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. His office was a monument to corporate success and barely contained ego, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city, a desk the size of a small aircraft carrier, and enough awards and certificates to wallpaper a modest apartment. The walls were decorated with photos of Theodore shaking hands with various important-looking people, all of whom appeared to be trying not to look directly at the camera. I found him behind his massive desk, his hair still bearing the damp evidence of our earlier encounter, furiously typing what I was fairly certain was my termination paperwork. His fingers attacked the keyboard with the violence usually reserved for personal vendettas, and steam was practically rising from his collar. "Theodore," I began, stepping confidently into his office with all the swagger I could muster, "I have a solution that will turn this morning's unfortunate incident into a tremendous opportunity for—" "The only solution," he snarled without bothering to look up from his screen, "is your immediate and permanent removal from this company, this building, and preferably this time zone." My foot, apparently deciding that this was an excellent moment to demonstrate its independence, connected with the Persian rug that Theodore had positioned strategically in front of his desk. The rug, which probably cost more than my monthly rent and was apparently as treacherous as it was expensive, sent me into a spectacular pirouette that would have impressed ballet instructors and horrified workplace safety inspectors in equal measure. I spun with the grace of a figure skater having a complete nervous breakdown, my laminated presentation pages flying from my hands like oversized confetti celebrating the world's most expensive mistake. The pages formed a perfect spiral in the air, each one catching the morning light streaming through Theodore's massive windows before descending with mathematical precision onto his aircraft carrier desk. The laminated pages landed with the accuracy of a precision bombing campaign, knocking over his coffee mug, because apparently the universe had decided that coffee-related incidents were going to be the theme of my professional downfall, scattering his carefully organized papers like leaves in a hurricane, and somehow, and I still don't understand the physics of this, managing to activate the office's sprinkler system. Water began cascading from the ceiling with the enthusiasm of a small thunderstorm that had been waiting all morning for its cue to enter the performance. Theodore leaped onto his leather chair like it was a life raft in the North Atlantic, while I continued my involuntary spinning performance directly into his trophy case. The trophy case, a floor-to-ceiling monument to Theodore's sales achievements, received my impact with all the structural integrity of a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Glass shelves collapsed in a domino effect that would have been beautiful if it weren't so expensive, sending decades of sales awards cascading across the rapidly flooding office floor like the world's most costly waterfall. "Security!" Theodore screamed from his chair island, his voice cracking with the kind of panic usually reserved for maritime disasters. Water continued pouring from the sprinklers like the office had personally insulted the weather gods, and his awards bobbed around his feet like golden life preservers. But the piece de resistance came when I, in my desperate attempt to escape through the office door while the building's water system continued its impression of Niagara Falls, grabbed what I thought was the door handle. Instead, my flailing hand had somehow latched onto the fire alarm system. The building's emergency alert activated with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated marching band, sending ear-splitting sirens wailing throughout Bain's Technologies while strobe lights began flashing like the world's most aggressive disco. The combination of water, sirens, and flashing lights transformed the office into what I can only describe as the most expensive nightclub disaster in corporate history. The evacuation of Bain's Technologies proceeded with the organized chaos of a disturbed ant farm whose queen had just announced her retirement. Employees streamed out of exits with the confused urgency of people who weren't entirely sure whether they were fleeing a fire, a flood, or some kind of corporate-sponsored rave that had gotten wildly out of hand. I stood in the parking lot like a refugee from a particularly wet war zone, dripping steadily onto the asphalt while creating what appeared to be my own personal rain cloud. Glass confetti from Theodore's trophy case sparkled in my hair like the world's most expensive dandruff, and my tie had somehow migrated during the chaos to wrap around my left ankle in a way that defied both gravity and common sense. Theodore emerged from the building looking like he'd survived a small war between office equipment and weather systems. His expensive suit clung to him like a second skin made of regret and Italian wool, while his usually perfect hair now defied several laws of physics and at least one local ordinance regarding public appearance. His eyes had the wild look of someone who'd just discovered that reality was far more creative than any nightmare he could have imagined. He spotted me immediately across the parking lot, probably because I was still dripping and sparkling like a very sad human disco ball, and began marching toward me with the purposeful stride of someone planning to commit what would likely be ruled justifiable homicide by any jury of his corporate peers. "Whitman," he bellowed across the parking lot, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of fire trucks arriving and confused employees discussing whether this counted as a half-day or if they were expected to return to their flooded workstations. "You're finished. Done. I'm going to." His declaration of my professional doom was dramatically interrupted by his phone ringing with the aggressive enthusiasm of a device that had important news and wouldn't take silence for an answer. Then it rang again. And again. And again, creating a symphony of digital urgency that seemed to be building to some kind of technological crescendo. What? He snapped into the device, his finger jabbing at the screen with enough violence to crack lesser phones. His eyes remained locked on me like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey and was savoring the moment before the kill. What followed was a conversation that I could only witness through Theodore's facial expressions, which progressed through a journey of human emotion that would have impressed method acting coaches. He went from righteous anger to confusion to complete bewilderment to what appeared to be existential terror, with several stops along the way that I didn't recognize but definitely wanted to avoid experiencing personally. Yes, this is Theodore Carmichael. Yes, I'm the head of sales for the Northeast Division. What do you mean they're asking for Hannah Whitman specifically? No, that's impossible, she just destroyed half the building. They want who to handle their account exclusively? But she caused a flood. And a fire alarm. And my trophy case is floating in my office. What do you mean they were impressed by her aggressive approach? What do you mean they've never seen such innovative sales tactics? I watched from what I hoped was a safe distance as Theodore's face cycled through every shade of red available in the human color spectrum, with a few stops in purple that suggested his blood pressure was entering uncharted territory. Other employees had begun gathering in small clusters around the parking lot, whispering and pointing with the enthusiasm of people witnessing their tyrannical boss being reduced to a sputtering mess by a simple phone conversation. But sir, yes sir. I understand sir, immediate transfer with promotion, yes sir. The Chicago branch needs someone with her, yes sir, her unique skill set, yes sir. The phone call ended with Theodore staring at his device as if it had just confessed to having an affair with his wife. He looked up at me, opened his mouth to speak, closed it again, opened it once more, then simply made a sound that resembled a balloon slowly deflating while being strangled by a confused goose. Behind him, the fire department was setting up equipment to pump water out of the building while someone from facilities tried to explain to the fire chief that no, there hadn't been an actual fire, just an employer-related incident that had somehow activated multiple building systems simultaneously. 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office at Baines Technology's Chicago branch, reviewing quarterly reports that showed numbers so impressive they'd made the corporate executives in New York do what I was told was the equivalent of a happy dance in boardroom terms. My official title was Senior Account Executive, but I discovered that the office staff had nicknamed me the Hurricane after word of the legendary Reynolds account acquisition had spread through the corporate grapevine like wildfire in a paper factory. The story had evolved in the telling, as office legends tend to do, growing more elaborate with each retelling until most people believed I'd single-handedly revolutionized aggressive sales tactics by literally bringing down the establishment during negotiations. Some versions of the story had me deliberately flooding Theodore's office as part of an elaborate psychological warfare strategy. Others claimed I'd trained in some kind of corporate martial art that involved weaponizing office supplies and building systems. The truth, of course, was that the Reynolds executives had been so stunned by what they perceived as the most boldly innovative sales presentation in their collective experience that they demanded to work exclusively with the person who had thought so far outside the box that she'd apparently left the box in a completely different building. Their follow-up contract had been worth more than the entire Northeast Division's quarterly projections, and suddenly my unique approach to client engagement was being studied by business schools as an example of disruptive marketing strategies. My new office was strategically located on the ground floor with direct access to an emergency exit, and my assistant, a remarkably efficient woman named Rebecca Chen who apparently had experience managing what she diplomatically called high-impact personalities, had quietly installed additional safety features throughout my workspace. Reinforced furniture anchored to the floor, shatterproof coffee mugs made from some kind of space-age polymer, and a first aid station that looked like it could handle everything from paper cuts to small explosions. The Chicago branch had embraced my reputation with the kind of enthusiastic acceptance usually reserved for circus performers or exotic animals. My colleagues maintained respectful distances during meetings, but they did so with admiration rather than fear. I was their secret weapon, the account executive who could close deals by doing things that traditional sales training had never even considered. Theodore Carmichael, meanwhile, had been restructured into a new position managing the company's digital filing systems in the basement of the corporate headquarters. According to office gossip that traveled faster than bad news, he'd actually requested the transfer after developing what HR diplomatically termed performance anxiety episodes whenever anyone mentioned my name in his presence. Apparently, he'd also developed a nervous twitch involving coffee cups and had been seen avoiding Persian rugs with the dedication of someone with a life-threatening phobia. The only remaining reminder of that infamous Tuesday was a framed photograph on my desk, a security camera still image showing me mid-pirouette in Theodore's flooded office, arms outstretched like a very confused swan, surrounded by flying laminated papers and falling trophies while water cascaded from the ceiling. I'd had it professionally matted and captioned it "Aggressive Sales Tactics in Action" in elegant script that made it look like motivational office art.